Hi everyone. Today's topic is autism in the workplace. I know that they just did a brief introduction, but I'm going to have the panelists say a sentence or two more about themselves, and then we'll start. We'll start with Shannon Rosa.
Hi, I'm Shannon Rosa from Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. We are an autism information nexus for parents, professionals, and autistic people themselves. We have a book, a website, and a Facebook and Twitter presence that is heavily engaged with, I guess would be the phrase.
And the next person on the panel is John Marble.
Hey, I'm John. I'm with Autism Advantage. We recruit, train, place, and support autistic people in tech and beyond. We're the experts who built the SAP Autism at Work program and programs for other companies.
And lastly, we have Oliver Thornton.
Hi, Oliver Thornton here. I'm an adult. I'm an autistic adult. I am the CEO and co-founder of Coding Autism. What we do is we train autistic teenagers and adults in STEM-related skill sets, as well as help them find employment within the workforce.
So as we start off this panel, I know that a lot of you may be from your diversity and inclusion teams at your companies, and I just wanted to talk about language really quickly and how language impacts inclusion and community and understanding. So we're going to talk about the autism community and how the difference between person first and identity first language. John, would you like to?
Most autistic adults prefer autistic. I kind of liken it to that I'm gay, so I don't say that I'm someone who has homosexuality. I'm gay, I'm autistic, but I think intent matters a lot.
Yep, absolutely.
And I know a lot of people have probably been through diversity training that insists on person-first language, but it's, as John said, it's really important to respect what the person themselves uses, and the majority of autistic people do actually prefer autistic, so that's what we'll use.
In the news, I know many of you have seen there's been articles on Harvard Business Review, Fortune, Forbes, Huffington Post on neurodiversity, and so we're going to spend a little time talking about why neurodiversity and autism is at the forefront.
When we're looking at autism in its entirety, I mean, over the last several decades, we've seen that there's a negative stigma when it comes to autism and the workforce. I personally believe that a lot of that has been caused, let me rephrase this. I believe that the negative stigma that exists in the autism community has held back a lot of adults on the autism spectrum from obtaining employment within the technology industry or just any industry in general, whether it's despite their academic credentials, intellectual capabilities. If you look at the statistic out there, there's roughly 80 to 90% of all adults on the autism spectrum who are either unemployed or underemployed. And it's something that's completely alarming to me, and all of us on the panel are working tirelessly to create initiatives that can help combat that statistic, because autistic talent is very unique and they have very high capabilities to do certain things extremely well in comparison to neurotypical individuals.
I mean, the truth is that you need us and we need you. I see some people on their phones now that wouldn't have their phones if it weren't for autistic engineers or autistic CEOs. We need neurotypical people as well. So I think that's pretty much the emphasis of the entire conference.
Agreed.
Okay, yeah. What are the main obstacles you encounter in trying to scale autism hiring?
As I previously mentioned, I think stigma is a big issue with the autism community, whether it's within the community or it's the management within an organization. Stigma has played a significant role as to why autistic talent hasn't been able to thrive as well as they have the capabilities and potential to do so. And I think although we are seeing a progressive trend in companies such as SAP, Microsoft, and the HPs that are developing autism hiring initiatives and identifying the talent that autistic talent contains, I do see there's also a lot of different companies, individuals, managerial capabilities, etc., that aren't identifying that talent or just simply unaware of it. So being able to battle that negative stigma or that ignorance of understanding what autistic talent can do for an organization is an uphill battle, but we are seeing a trend towards.
And that's a lot of what we do is management training, working with companies to recognize why they need neurodiversity and also how to interact with neurodiversity. We offer free training to recruiters for any companies, just how to recruit autistic people, how to engage them in the interview process. We're happy to do that with any company.
I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shannon.
And I think a lot of people actually don't understand what neurodiversity means. It doesn't mean that you have a lot of people in your office who are obviously autistic that you can tell by looking at them. I think a lot of people look at things like Rain Man or the new series Atypical and they think that's what autism is, when the fact is you're probably working with a lot of autistic people already, undiagnosed or not, and knowing how to accommodate and incorporate those talents as diverse as they are and not just in the stereotypical means is really crucial to the concept of neurodiversity.
Agreed. How do we incorporate different thinking, different abilities, and different skills into the workforce?
You want to take on that, John?
I'm not diagnosed autistic myself, but I work intensively with autistic people and professionals and parents. And what I hear more than anything is that people do not take autistic needs seriously. So for instance, somebody who is on the verge of a meltdown and is having a hard time doing their job, it doesn't mean that they're not capable of their job, it means that they need accommodations at the time. Or they don't understand that maybe an autistic person works on a different kind of sleep cycle or a different production kind of cycle. The case is that, and a lot of Silicon Valley offices take a kind of flexible approach, and I think if you take those flexible approaches and apply it to autistic needs, whether you know somebody is autistic or not, you'll see a lot more productivity, because usually what works for autistic people, things like non-flickering lights, and I can say like this space right here with this light in our eyes and all the noise behind us. Again, like I don't have a diagnosis, but I'm having a tough time with that. So recognizing that healthy autistic workspaces would work for everybody, I think, is something that workplaces could
So I heard a venture capitalist on a panel yesterday talk about that they look for conflict and friction within teams because they want to see how people interact and how conflict can be a good thing. I think Jack, my business partner here, who's not autistic, I'm autistic, we have a lot of conflict and friction, but that leads to productivity. And like I learn how he works as a non-autistic person. He learns how I work as an autistic person. And through that, we end up coming up with breakthroughs and ideas that we wouldn't have had before if it was just us by ourselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said there. And as someone who is diagnosed as an autistic individual myself, I've always been someone who hasn't learned in the traditional sense. I went through school and I was in an IEP program, K through 12, and I did go to college, but when it came to being in a traditional classroom and an environment, I felt like I tended to struggle a lot more, where when I found something that I was extremely passionate about. I've always been someone who's always wanted to self-educate themselves in certain topics that I had fascinations about, and that's allowed me to thrive and become the person that I am today. And when companies start to identify this, whether it's adjusting their work environment to tailor to individuals, autistic individuals, or having managerial teams and buddy systems and whatnot within companies to really identify how someone with autism can learn better or interact better with their workforce and the colleagues that they're working with, you can really tap into autistic talent and help them succeed at whatever their mindset and their goals are.
Can you guys give me an example of an accommodation a company can make, something simple that really changes the productivity and the success for an autistic worker?
Sure. SAP has a really great template that they've been adopting. They launched their Autism at Work program in 2013, and through their onboarding processes, their mentorship processes, what is fascinating about their model is that they don't only have support within their 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 work day, but they also have a support team that works with their autistic talent outside of the workforce as well, whether it's life issues that they're having or if there's any concerns that they have with their current work environment. And that's allowed their retention rate as a company for their autistic talent to be very, very high. So seeing these type of accommodations that companies are putting together are really starting to make an impact in that community, and you're seeing other major companies start to replicate that now as well.
And we built that program for SAP and are helping other companies build those programs as well. And I think Shannon's kind of at least I consider a particular expert in this.
Well, let's say the biggest thing that a company can do for autistic people, undiagnosed or not, is take their needs absolutely seriously. Because I see too many people, especially in highly competitive Silicon Valley workplaces that I myself used to be in, and what are considered personality shortcomings are actually accommodation needs. So if somebody is having a hard time and literally can't function at the moment, instead of seeing them as a failure, ask what you can do to help them. If they have sensory needs like auditory sensitivities, if they need to work with headphones on, don't consider that a challenge or a difficulty. That's something that legitimately happens. If they need to have fidgets in order, or doodling, or anything else, if they need to actually be on their phone while they're talking to you, people say that that's rude, but some people, that's how they function, and not demanding eye contact. Eye contact is actually not necessary, and in a lot of cultures it's considered rude. Just get over a lot of your assumptions about what actually constitutes productivity and look at what actually constitutes productivity as opposed to the social, froth that goes around it.
I have to learn that myself because I work with a colleague who has ADD who always looks at his phone, and that deeply bothers me, but it deeply helps him concentrate. And I know I just need to give him that space to actually do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that
And I know
as well.
a lot of people on the spectrum, something that's helped us is for them to actually let the other person know they're having a meeting with, how they function and what works best for them. And don't be afraid to ask the person too, why they're using their phone or using headphones and things like that. There needs to be open conversation.
Yeah,
No.
and also to be aware that if somebody is having a hard time, if they are autistic, they might not necessarily be able to talk to you about it at that time, and they might not even actually understand what's going on because of a very common co-occurring condition called alexithymia, which is the inability to assess one's own emotional state. So just, again, focus on the work that they're able to do and how they can do it and how you can best help them do it, as opposed to trying to get them to fit into a normative workspace.
Where do you see autism in the workplace headed in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
I think the biggest focus that I would emphasize on that is integration, and that's twofold. One, in autistic hiring programs, I kind of see that we've gone through an arc of having no job or being institutionalized to having work in a sheltered workshop where it's just, disabled people maybe getting paid under minimum wage, to having autistic people hired by companies who source autistic people. There's a couple of companies who do, software testing, things like that. But really where we're going now is integration into the workplace. Yes, when we work with EY, and when EY started their autistic hiring program, they hired 4 people in Philadelphia, had them all in an office, which was great. But now when they've hired people from our program, they have them integrated into the rest of the office. So that's one of the things that we work with. Also, integration of all types of autistic people. I was with Danny from SAP who spoke yesterday. We're at a presentation this spring, and I was sitting next to him, and there are lots of slides of nice white autistic guys, and he kind of leans over to me and says, yeah, but how do we recruit from I said, oh, black autistic people, people of color, women. He was like, yeah. So one of the things that we're doing is working with people like Shannon who have vast networks to actually build those pipelines. There's black autistic voices. There's Latino autistic voices. One of the people I followed on YouTube is a 21-year-old black fashion vlogger who's autistic. And I don't know half the things she says because she's 21 years old and I'm getting old. But like I follow her. And so the more that we open the door, the more that we need to leave it open for other people.
Yeah, and I also think in regards to integration that having that different type of diversity included into your workforce is essential for innovation. And when you're seeing different companies such as the Microsofts and the SAPs developing their Autism at Work initiatives, that they're recruiting a talent that brings a unique advantage to an organization and drives innovation. So in the next 5, 10, 15 years, I can see, especially if you look at how many autistic individuals there are in the United States today. There's, as of 2014, the Center of Disease Control said there was roughly 3.5 million autistic Americans, 2.7 being children, 800,000 being adults, and that roughly 1 out of 68 children are born with autism in the United States every year. That's a significant increase in autism, and it just also identifies that a huge portion of our workforce is going to be on the autism spectrum. So if companies aren't learning to adapt and hire autistic talent, then they're going to fall behind when it comes to the next innovative trends of our future.
And I would say that I think that autism, not just awareness, but acceptance has really been increasing in the American culture in general and hopefully all over the world eventually, but following along kind of the pathway of another marginalized community, which would be the LGBT community. I mean, the Human Rights Campaign, which is the kind of the aware, if you're aware, they did a study recently that showed the state of LGBT acceptance in California cities, and a number of cities in California are like 100% quality of life for LGBT people to live in. Like there are all these 100% technically safe cities, right? And that's something that wouldn't have been a thing even 10 years ago. And so as we see more autistic awareness, more autistic acceptance through things like not just TV shows like The Good Doctor, which is flawed, but so much better than something like Atypical, which is all about the, quirky white nerd cis dude, wanting
or the
to score,
accountant,
right? I think, and having books like Neurotribes by Steve Silverman, if you haven't read that, that's just a fantastic, the history of neurodiversity, including a lot of Silicon Valley people. I think as this happens, this is going to percolate into the culture in 5 to 10 years, I'm hoping, and not just, for people who are in the typical office workspace, but for people of all abilities. I think with the shutdown of things like sheltered workshops, like John talked about, Goodwill is shutting down their sheltered workshops on the East Coast. Legislation has been passed and is continuing to be passed that guarantees people with intellectual disabilities a fair wage as opposed to a sub-minimum wage, which is now legal to be paid in a lot of areas. I think the recognition of autistic people as full human beings with the same rights, hopes, and dreams as everybody else in the workplace and not is going to be a thing, right? So, yeah,
Absolutely.
So one of my favorite quotes is by James Baldwin, who was giving a speech at Cambridge, and he said, one of the things that I know that the white world does not know is that black people are just like everybody else. We're dictators and murderers and tyrants too, which sounds harsh, but like that, it applies to autistic people. It's average. We're average people. And I'm trying not to look at my colleague now because sometimes in my head I have to think like, okay, am I doing this because I'm autistic or am I just being an asshole right now?
Yeah, exactly.
So like I constantly
Not
have
that.
to check myself.
But yeah, I mean, that goes back to not patronizing people, right? I mean, you can say, are they doing this because they're autistic or are they doing it because it's a jerk? And it could be because they're a jerk. You can't just like, oh, they're autistic. They couldn't possibly. Like, no, they can screw you over. Sure, absolutely. And people think autistic people can't lie. That's so not true.
So those are, different stereotypes.
Yep.
So moving forward, what's the key to sustainable neurodiversity employment for employers in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
I would say support. One of the things that we do that SAP's done really well is that once we place people, we don't just leave them there. We continue to provide support both to the employee, to the manager, continue to have engagement. And part of that is actually building culture. So as we place people in Silicon Valley and outside of it, trying to get away from the speaker. As we place people in Silicon Valley, we recently placed 20 people with companies. We don't just leave them there.
Can you talk a little bit more specifically what kind of supports you provide?
Sure. So we do training for managers. Sorry, Shannon. We do training for managers. We continue to do training with the individuals once employed. We help, if they need accommodations, if they need kind of manager training, we continue to do that. And then a hidden thing that I think is very valuable is as we place people, we're developing alumni networks. So if we take our students to say we went to eBay the other week so that they could observe their data scientists. We brought our alumni as well. So now that we have alumni that are autistic, that are placed in companies, they're becoming mentors for the next generation. And the more that we do that, the more that we can develop networks and we can develop support.
Yeah, I believe Temple Grandin said a quote similar that she said that one of the most important things that she thought would improve the autism community is having autistic mentors. Mm-hmm. She said something on the lines of that, and I think that applies to anyone with a neurological disorder. If you were going to hit sustainable neurodiversity goals, like you said, it's having those management training processes in place for companies where their managers are educated on the perks and the advantages of having neurodiverse talent, and for our community to be aware of what neurodiversity is and how many people in the United States live with a neurological disorder or comorbidity in general. So just it's an awareness thing. It's like when we have conferences like Tech Inclusion, everyone here, if they're meeting other people and they're figuring out different ways to create synergies with one another and to express the advantages of neurodiversity, that's where we're going to see monumental change in sustainability.
So who here works at a company? Everybody work at a company? All right, so part of the supports that we do is integration in companies. So there's 3 things that you could do to help grow neurodiverse culture in Silicon Valley. One, you can hire autistic people. Feel free to talk to me afterwards, or my colleague Jack. Jack, raise your hand. Yeah. I'm autistic, so I probably won't approach you, but so be forceful in approaching me. We're happy to talk to you about that. 2, you can host students that we have, people who are affiliated with Shannon at your companies. Autistic people tend to do well with models. So if our students and alumni can see your data scientists working, that can be something that is a great benefit to them. And 3, if you're interested in growing and supporting autistic people in tech, you can volunteer. We welcome people to observe our classes, which are down in San Jose. We have people from companies come in and coach our kids. I say kids, I'm getting older. Some of them are late 20s. I'm just getting older. So you can hire people, you can host them at your company just so they can see what you do and work, and you can volunteer.
So, yeah, and I would say that another aspect is to be aware that neurodiverse and autistic people don't necessarily fit the same kind of typical career trajectory that people think that you're supposed to follow. So I don't have an autism diagnosis, but a lot of people I have an autistic son, and a lot of people who are related to autistic people share traits. Like I have no executive function skills whatsoever, which means that the office manager in my brain got fired before I was born. So,
That's a really good way to put it.
So when I was working in tech, I was fantastic at managing projects if somebody gave me checklists. When I jumped to the next level, which was to think of the big picture and be in charge of creating big pictures, I completely flamed out. And the thing is, if they had been able to figure out that, because I went then to consult on startups, and again, fantastic. I could work in environments where I was the content manager, content creation, doing networks, and really succeeded in that kind of environment, but there was no way for me to be promoted or to progress in the previous cutthroat kind of ironclad promotions tree that I had been in the previous company. And I think that if you're going to work with people who don't necessarily think and problem solve in the way that a typical office does, you need to create spaces for them and make sure that they can succeed too. You need to be more creative and flexible.
Growth is a huge thing. A lot of times we're focused on the work. I went from working for President Obama in the White House to moving out here, wanted to figure out what I would do, ended up taking a minimum wage job in a warehouse. And a colleague of mine found me there. I was like, yeah, I think you might have some skills that are, that are beyond a warehouse. I'm like, but I'm getting really good at driving this forklift. A lot of times we won't promote ourselves, and so we see a lot of autistic people who kind of get stuck in a career path, and we help them out.
Yep. That's where coaches and mentors play such a big
Exactly.
role.
You took the words right out my mouth.
We have just a couple minutes and wanted to reach out to the audience if anybody had any questions. Who's, go ahead, sir. Yeah. There you go, sir.
Thank you for being here. Great panel discussion. I wanted to ask, I work for Sprint, and many of our...
Could you speak up just a little bit? We're having a hard time hearing.
Sure, is this better?
Yeah, much
okay,
better.
Good. All right. At our company, many of us work from home, and I just wanted to know if you had any experiences with placements and working from home. Is that something that you are engaged in already? I just want to get more of an understanding in that space.
Okay. Can we borrow your
Penny
mic back?
I work from home, just so y'all know, because I cannot work in an office. I figured that out a while ago, and that's what works best for me, but not everybody has that option.
We're currently in one of our 6-week data analysis cohorts, and one of our students already is taking job offers, and some of them are remote working. I think autistic people are like a lot of people, that sometimes it works really well remotely. It's more of the structure and support that you provide, which is really what you would do for any employee who works from home.
Yeah, I think a prime example of an autistic operated company that works remotely is Ultra Testing. I believe almost all of their software testers do work remotely, and they have managerial processes to manage their remote talent. So it's definitely possible for someone with autism to be able to work successfully in a remote position.
If you give autistic people structure and clear indications of what you want and just the framework, a lot of times we can kind of outproduce a lot of other people, but we need that very just clear instruction. And a lot of times when you have remote work programs, you have to do that anyway for employees, especially because managers are a bit more nervous about people working from home.
Any other questions?
Oh.
Yes, sir.
I didn't mean to talk about Danny like you weren't here. I didn't see that you were there.
Thanks, John. Testing. So we're talking about people on the spectrum that are entering the workforce. But if we're talking about really assessing, if it was 1 out of 68, like Oliver was saying, or some other number, but if we think about testing at an earlier age and providing all the support, especially that confidence, and by far, role models or sponsors along the way are critical, and it's best to have them that come from your same, whatever that area is or that specialty is. But in terms of testing people as we go along, I assume that we're going to get more and more people that appear to be on the spectrum as long as we do the testing. And I think, John, you probably had the right answer.
I wasn't diagnosed until I'm an adult. I'm kind of a generation that wasn't diagnosed. There's a lot of diagnostic disparities in the United States. We work with a researcher in Georgia who's mapping rural Black autistic populations. People from the Black community, people from the Latino community are just not diagnosed as much as other people. So the more that we get better diagnosis, better supports in elementary school and high school, you're going to see a lot of autistic people who are openly autistic coming into the workforce.
And what's interesting too is that, like you said, you're in an older generation than I am. No offense on that. But when I was, 1994, when discussing autism was the flagship year where they kind of redefined autism as being this wide spectrum. So a lot of older people in their 30s, their 40s, and their 50s went being undiagnosed or found out that they were on the autism spectrum when they were later on in their lives. But yeah, no, I mean, in terms of diagnostic criteria, you're seeing a lot of the younger generation, more families are inclined to see if their child is on the autism spectrum because there's more awareness in our society of what autism was, whereas in the 1990s and the 1980s and previous to that, autism had a completely different definition. So yeah, you're seeing the diagnostic criteria starting to increase.
And really quick, there are a lot more adults being diagnosed with autism. Their children are getting diagnosed and they're starting to recognize the same traits in themselves, and then they're seeking diagnosis.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's not that there are fewer adults in the United States, it's just that we've never actually done a survey of autistic adults in the States. When the UK did a survey of autistic versus child diagnoses, they found out that the rate was identical, and there's no reason it wouldn't be the same in the United States, but the research just hasn't been done.
We have time maybe for one more question.
Hi, I have a question about the interview process. So everyone, if you've gone through the typical job interview process, you know that it's almost like learning a different skill set just to interview. And a part of what you do, and on the other side now, I'm in sales, so when you interview for a sales job, you are kind of on the spot as a salesperson. But even for every job, that's how it is. You have things on the back end. Hiring managers are rating you on communication, or can this person be a good team player, right? So it sounds like that process maybe could be better if we were going to have more autistic people in the workforce. How would you change the typical job interview process?
So I would just say that the interview and the sourcing process in Silicon Valley can be vastly better, and it's one of the reasons why we kind of have homogenous workforces in Silicon Valley. So we kind of do both ends, right? We work with autistic people so that they can navigate the interview process, so that they can understand it and that they can be successful in it, but we also work with companies so that they can have a better interview process. And that doesn't just benefit autistic people, it benefits other underrepresented groups, and it really benefits the workforce in general. Find me afterwards. My colleague Jack is here. He's also he's a sales guy. I don't understand sales. My best friend's a salesman. I don't get it. Jack's a salesman. I don't get it. But he can speak your language.
To supplement that answer, when you look at like the traditional desk face-to-face interview process, typically that doesn't cater to the strengths of an autistic interviewer. And I think that changing the interview process is, say if you're applying for an engineering job, and instead of being on the spot, you give someone with autism applying for the job a project to work on over a certain amount of time, you would see more successful results in an interview process where it's like, here's the project that I want you to work on, let's see if you can do this, instead of asking them social and communication related questions and vetting them based on how they can respond in that period of time, because naturally autistic individuals aren't the best in terms of social and communication skills. It's looking at, say, like a fish can't climb a tree or a bird can't swim in water. There's certain skill sets and advantages that autistic talent prefers to be involved with, and social and communication is a big part of the interview process. So I think that's where changing that and flipping the interview process on its head to cater to neurodiverse talent and autistic talent is where you're going to see more successful recruiting of autistic talent too.
And just to add to that really quickly, if you want a summary of how to best practices for running an interview with an autistic person, Microsoft has an autism hiring pilot program, and there's been some long form reporting on it that talked about this very specifically. So I would just Google that.
And we're happy to work with recruiters. We'll do a free training on interacting with autistic people.
And I think we're just out of time, so we're going to leave you with 3 takeaways from this session.
Yeah, I'll start. I'd say one key takeaway is that autistic talent and neurodiverse talent in general deserves a seat at the table. There's a lot of different initiatives with D&I right now that are trying to ramp up their diversity and inclusion recruiting within companies, but autistic talent is very significant. There's a lot of different unique advantages that autistic talent brings to an organization. It's all about identifying that and implementing that recruiting structure in your workforce.
I would emphasize to make the business case for diversity in your company. I don't hear that a lot in Silicon Valley, and that's why I moved here. I don't think a lot of companies realize how much money they're leaving on the table by having homogenous workforces. And the good thing about companies like SAP and Microsoft is that they're starting to quantify the outcomes of their autistic hiring programs, and they're starting to measure the impact it has, the positive impact that it has on productivity, on team dynamics, on profitability. If you take that data and marry it with system science, yeah, autistic people have some great skills, but it's really the diversity that really is driving that. If you want to have better productivity, you need to have better input. So as we quantify what we do in autistic hiring programs, we're going to use that to make the case why Silicon Valley needs to diversify in general.
I would just take off from both of what John and Oliver said. There's such a vast untapped talent pool of autistic people that you're not working with already and that you already are working with. And so making sure that your workplace is autism friendly is a really good investment, and it's not just for your autistic employees, but for all employees.
If I could get a big round of applause to our panelists today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you, guys.
Come and talk to us afterwards.